The glass-walled office offered a panoramic view of the city, a sprawling tapestry of steel and ambition that Alara Vance had helped to shape. At 30, she was a principal architect at one of the city's most prestigious firms, her name whispered with a mixture of respect and envy in the male-dominated industry. Her latest project? The Sterling Tower, a monument of minimalist design and structural audacity, was nearing completion. It was a project she had poured her heart and soul into, a testament to her professional prowess, and she had always believed, a quiet offering to her future husband. In 3 days, she was to marry Julian Sterling, the charismatic heir to Sterling Enterprises. Their wedding was to be the social event of the year, a fairy tale climax to a life she had carefully, meticulously built. Alara was not a woman of loud displays or grand gestures. Her strength lay in her quiet precision, her ability to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be, a blueprint of potential and order. This same meticulous nature had led her to the small, unassuming cafe on the corner of Elm and Fifth, a place Julian frequented for his lunch meetings. She hadn't gone there with suspicion in her heart, but with a simple errand to drop off a forgotten binder for him, a stack of crucial blueprints he would need for his presentation with the City Planning Commission. Instead of panicking, Alara went into full strategic mode. She didn't confront Julian or the contractor. She began to meticulously re-examine every single blueprint, every line of code, every design specification for the environmental control system. She worked tirelessly, late into the night, her mind a fortress of concentration. She didn't just review her own work. She did a full-scale audit of Julian's previous projects, looking for a pattern of deceit. What she found was a trail of small but significant fabrications, a history of inflated costs and shoddy oversight. Julian had always been a master of appearances, but beneath the glossy surface, his work was hollow. The air inside the cafe was thick with the scent of roasted coffee and old books. Alara spotted him immediately, tucked away in a dimly lit booth in the back. Julian, her handsome, golden-haired fiancé, was laughing. His head tilted back in a way she knew so well. Her heart swelled for a brief, fleeting second before she saw the hand he was holding. It was small, manicured, and rested not on the table, but intertwined with his beneath it. The hand belonged to Chloe Davies, a young, vivacious intern from his father's company. Chloe's hair was a cascade of bright blonde, her laughter a sharp, almost piercing sound that cut through the low murmur of the cafe. On the morning of the design review meeting, Julian was a picture of smug confidence. He walked into the glass-walled conference room with an air of triumphant arrogance, a small, vindictive smile on his face. The keyboard members were present, along with his father, Marcus, who sat at the head of the table, his face a neutral mask. Alara entered moments later, her expression calm, her demeanor unruffled. She carried only a slim tablet in her hand. A sudden, chilling stillness fell over Alara. It wasn't the shock that paralyzed her, but a cold, clinical disbelief. The world, for a moment, seemed to lose its color, its sound, its dimension. All that existed was the tableau in the booth, Julian's easy charm, Chloe's girlish adoration, and the damning intimacy of their joined hands. This wasn't a one-time mistake, not a drunken lapse in judgment. This was a comfortable, ongoing betrayal, a quiet desecration of their shared life. The truth hit her with the clean, brutal force of a hammer strike, leaving no room for doubt or denial. Julian began his presentation with a dramatic flourish. He projected his doctored schematics onto the large screen, pointing to alleged flaws and potential structural failures in Alara's design. He spoke with passion and a feigned sense of alarm, his voice filled with righteous indignation. He was an actor playing the part of a man who had uncovered a terrible truth. "This is a disaster waiting to happen," he proclaimed, looking directly at his father. "This project, as it stands, is a monument to incompetence, not innovation. The entire system is flawed. My ex-fiancée, now your wife, has jeopardized the entire company with her negligence." She didn't storm forward. She didn't scream or demand an explanation. Alara simply stood there, a silent statue of betrayed trust. The binder in her hand felt impossibly heavy, a worthless object now. With a calm that surprised even herself, she turned and walked out of the cafe, the click of the bell behind her, the only sound that marked her departure. She walked the city streets for hours, the sterile blueprints of her future crumbling in her mind. A murmur ran through the room. Julian looked at Alara, expecting to see fear or panic. Instead, her face was completely impassive. She simply watched him, a quiet, almost sad look in her eyes, as if she were watching a child throw a tantrum. When she returned to her apartment that evening, Julian was waiting for her. He was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone, a picture of careless privilege. "Where have you been?" "Ilara, I tried calling you." His tone held a hint of annoyance, as if her absence was an inconvenience to his day. When Julian was finished, the silence in the room was deafening. He looked at Marcus, expecting him to deliver the final judgment. But Marcus simply turned to Alara. "Ilara," he said, his voice calm. "Your turn." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw a stranger. She saw the entitled son of a powerful man, a man who had never been denied anything in his life. The man she had thought she knew, the charming, ambitious partner, was a carefully constructed facade. The anger, so long held at bay, began to surface, a slow, methodical burn. Alara stood up. She didn't even need to project her voice. Her quiet authority commanded attention. "Thank you, Julian, for your spirited presentation," she began, her tone a soft, elegant rebuke. "I have, as you know, been reviewing your findings. I believe you have made a few errors in your analysis." "I went to the cafe to drop off your binder," she said, her voice a low, even hum. "The one for your meeting. I saw you." She gestured to the screen. The doctored schematics disappeared, replaced by the original, verified blueprints. What Julian has failed to mention is that these schematics are not from my final design. They are from a draft submitted to the contractor 6 months ago, a draft we updated and corrected with their own feedback. The flaws Julian has so dramatically pointed out were already addressed and fixed. Julian's scrolling hand stilled. He looked up, his brow furrowed in a flicker of surprise before it was replaced by a look of dismissive condescension. "Saw me what?" he asked, a smug half-smile playing on his lips. "Having a coffee with a colleague, it's called networking. Alara." She then tapped her tablet. A new presentation appeared on the screen, a side-by-side comparison of Julian's presentation and her own. She began, with meticulous detail, to dismantle his lies one by one. She showed the original emails, the signed contracts, the updated schematics. She spoke with a calm, unyielding precision, her words like surgical strikes, each one severing another piece of his carefully constructed lie. "It's called cheating, Julian," she corrected, the words clear and sharp. "Holding hands under the table is not networking. It's an affair." Then, she delivered the final blow. "And Julian," she said, her voice dropping, "as for the structural integrity of my design, I assure you it is sound. My main concern, however, has been with the structural integrity of your own work." She clicked a button on her tablet. A new slide appeared, a meticulously documented report of Julian's previous projects, complete with links to internal audits and budget overruns. "This," she said, her voice a cold, quiet storm, "is not a new issue. It is a pattern of incompetence and, I suspect, something far more sinister. I have notified the internal audit department of these discrepancies. They will be conducting a full review of all your previous work. As of today, I am taking full control of the Sterling Tower project. Your services are no longer required." Julian sighed, a sound of weary impatience. He got up and walked over to her, trying to take her hands. "Ilara, don't be so dramatic. It's just a fling. It meant nothing. You're my fiancé. You're the one I'm marrying in 3 days. This is just a momentary lapse. It's over." Julian's face went white. He stared at the screen, at the irrefutable proof of his deceit, and then at his father, whose expression of quiet disappointment had now hardened into a look of finality. He had not just failed to expose Alara, he had completely exposed himself. He had thought he was a player in a game of power and strategy, but he was only a pawn. And now he had been taken off the board. He looked at Alara, the woman he had so carelessly discarded, and saw not a victim, but the executioner of his own professional life. The silent, powerful dignity she had possessed in the cafe now seemed to him like the most terrifying weapon of all. His words were a final, crushing blow. He wasn't even sorry. He was arrogant, dismissive, and utterly convinced that she, a woman he was about to marry, would accept this casual betrayal. He assumed her quiet nature meant she would be submissive, that she would forgive and forget, and that they would go on with their lavish, perfect life as if nothing had happened. His entitlement was breathtaking. With Julian's professional life in tatters, a new kind of calm settled over the Sterling estate. His public humiliation and the subsequent internal audit of his work had been a decisive victory for Ilara, cementing her position as a formidable force within the company. She was no longer just the CEO's new wife. She was a respected professional, a strategic partner, and a pillar of the Sterling family. Marcus, for his part, looked at her with a quiet satisfaction, the kind of pride a father would have for a truly exceptional child. Their relationship, once a cold, transactional alliance, had begun to evolve into something far deeper and more complex. Over, Ilara repeated, her voice a whisper. The wedding, the house they had planned, the future she had envisioned, all of it felt like a sick joke. Julian, you didn't just have a fling, you broke a promise, you broke my trust. The intellectual sparring that had defined their early days now gave way to a shared, comfortable silence. They would sit in the evenings in the grand library, he with his endless financial reports, and she with her architectural schematics. They didn't need to fill the space with conversation. Their shared ambition and mutual respect were enough. They had found a kindred spirit in each other, a person who understood the weight of responsibility, the quiet thrill of a plan well executed, and the immense satisfaction of building something of lasting value. I broke your trust. I'm the one who's going to spend the rest of my life with you, and you're getting upset over one small indiscretion. Be reasonable, Ilara. One evening, Ilara found herself feeling strangely unwell. A wave of nausea had hit her without warning, and a dull, persistent fatigue had settled into her bones. At first, she dismissed it as stress from the recent events. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotion and professional intensity, but as the symptoms persisted, a new, unsettling possibility began to take root in her mind. Her period was late. She had always been meticulous about her health, her routine, her every plan. This was a variable she had never accounted for, never even considered. His lack of remorse, his complete inability to grasp the gravity of his actions, sealed her decision. She had been foolish, perhaps naive, but she would not be a doormat. She would not be a woman who stayed because it was convenient or because the world expected her to. Fear and a strange, quiet excitement swirled in her gut. She went to a local clinic for a discreet checkup, using a different name to avoid the inevitable media frenzy. The results came back a few hours later. A single word on the lab report that changed her world forever. Positive. No, she said, pulling her hands away from his. I won't be reasonable. I won't be your wife. This is over, Julian. The engagement is off. Ilara was pregnant. With Marcus's child, Julian's face went from dismissive to incredulous. What, don't be ridiculous. The wedding is in 3 days. The contracts are signed. The guests are coming. My father would never allow it. He's invested millions into this. The news hit her with a profound, almost spiritual jolt. This was not a part of the plan. Their marriage was one of convenience, a strategic maneuver. There was no romance, no pretense of a life of shared affection. But now, this new life, a tiny human being, was a profound and undeniable consequence of their union. It was a tangible, living symbol that their alliance was more than just a piece of paper and a set of business agreements. It was real. He was right. Julian's father, Marcus Sterling, was the driving force behind everything. He was a man of steel and ambition, a self-made titan who had built Sterling Enterprises from the ground up. The wedding was as much a business merger as it was a union between two people. She returned to the Sterling estate, the small, confidential report clutched in her hand. Marcus was in the library, the glow of his desk lamp illuminating his silver hair. She walked in and stood before him, the report still in her hand. Her hands were shaking slightly. Julian's words, however, did not frighten Ilara. They hardened her resolve. Your father's investments are not my responsibility. My dignity is, and you have none, Julian. She turned and walked to the bedroom, leaving him standing in the living room, a bewildered look on his face. He looked up, his sharp eyes immediately noticing her subtle distress. Ilara, is something wrong? His voice was laced with concern. The next day was a blur of phone calls and frantic arguments. Julian's attempts to talk her out of it were met with her cold, unwavering resolve. She refused to see him, to hear his empty apologies. The world she had known, the social circle that had celebrated their engagement, began to crumble around her. The whispers were already starting. Julian, in his arrogance, had not even tried to be discreet. She took a deep breath, the words catching in her throat. "Marcus!" she began, her voice a soft, unsteady whisper. I have something to tell you." Ilara was in the middle of a tense phone call with her mother, who was pleading with her to reconsider, when the doorbell rang. On the other side of the door stood Marcus Sterling. He was a man in his late 50s, his hair a distinguished silver, his face etched with the lines of hard-won battles. He was the opposite of his son. He possessed a quiet, watchful authority that commanded respect without needing to demand it. She handed him the report. He took it, his brow furrowed in confusion, and read the single word on the page. For a long moment, he was completely silent. His face was a mask of unreadable emotion. Ilara watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea how he would react. He could be angry, disappointed, or simply cold and distant. This was not a part of their agreement. He didn't speak. He simply looked at her, his gaze steady and assessing. She could see the disappointment in his eyes, not for her, but for his son. He had witnessed Ilara's confrontation with Julian yesterday. He had been having lunch in the same cafe, observing the scene with a quiet detachment that belied the turbulence within. He had seen the way his son had behaved, the lack of respect, the casual cruelty, and he had seen the quiet dignity with which Ilara had handled the betrayal. He had seen a flicker of his own strength in her, a resolve that Julian so clearly lacked. Then a slow, gentle smile spread across his face, a smile she'd never seen before. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a kind of wonder that took her breath away. "I need to speak with you, Ilara," he said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a request, it was an expectation. "Ilara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. This is a miracle." He got up from his chair and walked to her, taking her hands in his. "A child. Our child. I never thought, not at this age. I had given up on the idea of a family. Not a real one. Julian. He has always been a constant reminder of my failures as a father. But this is a new beginning." Ilara, however, was a step ahead. Her professional instincts were honed to a razor's edge. She had noticed Julian's increasingly erratic behavior and the subtle shift in the contractor's communications, a new, hesitant tone, a series of strange delays. Her methodical mind, trained to detect structural weaknesses, had also become adept at spotting human vulnerabilities. She had a network of her own now, discreet and loyal subordinates who respected her leadership and were quietly alarmed by Julian's antics. They had tipped her off to Julian's clandestine meetings and his new, aggressive demeanor. He was not angry. He was not disappointed. He was overwhelmed with a deep, quiet happiness. He saw this child not as a complication, but as a profound gift. He saw it as an opportunity for a second chance, a chance to build the kind of family he had always wanted. He saw a future that was no longer defined by the mistakes of his past, but by the promise of a new, legitimate heir, one forged in a partnership of respect and shared strength. Ilara, her heart a tangled mess of pain and exhaustion, nodded and led him to the living room. He sat on the opposite end of the couch, the same couch where Julian had sat the night before. The contrast was jarring. Ilara felt the last vestiges of her fear melt away, replaced by a profound and unexpected sense of security. She looked at this man, her husband, and saw a person who was not just a powerful CEO, but a man who was capable of great tenderness and a deep, abiding love for the family he was about to build. This child, an innocent life, was transforming their relationship from a calculated alliance into a genuine partnership. "The wedding is off," Ilara stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "Your son..." Later that evening, as they sat in the living room, Marcus pulled her close, resting his hand gently on her stomach. The gesture was so tender, so unexpected, that it brought tears to Ilara's eyes. "My son is a fool." Marcus cut her off, his words sharp and final. "He's a careless boy who has no idea of the consequences of his actions. I have spent a lifetime building an empire, and he is determined to ruin it with his immaturity and his petty affairs. Julian will not take this well, Marcus said, his voice now a low, serious rumble. He will see this as the ultimate betrayal, the ultimate act of disinheritance. He will go crazy. He will lose what little sanity he has left. Ilara looked at him, surprised by his brutal honesty. Then you understand why I can't marry him. He has already lost it, Ilara said, a quiet sadness in her voice. This will just be the final nail in the coffin. Marcus nodded slowly. I do, and I respect you for it. Most women in your position would have simply turned a blind eye for the sake of the name and the money. You did not. You chose to walk away with your dignity intact. He paused, his gaze fixed on her. A woman with that kind of strength is rare. She is also invaluable. Marcus looked at her, his expression a mixture of profound love and a fierce protectiveness. Then we will be ready for him. We will be a fortress, Ilara. We will build a world for this child that is strong and stable and loving. We will not be defined by Julian's madness. We will be defined by our own strength, and we will face him together. The words hung in the air, a strange mix of praise and a warning. Ilara didn't know how to respond. He wasn't here to beg her to reconsider. He was here for something else entirely. Ilara looked at him, at the man she had married out of convenience, and saw a true partner. Their relationship had begun with a bitter end and a calculated beginning, but now it was defined by a new, powerful, and unexpected start. The child within her was a profound symbol of their future, a living testament to the fact that their alliance had become something far more real and meaningful than they had ever intended. Julian had cheated, and she had married his CEO father. Now, a new life was growing inside of her, a life that would drive him to the brink of insanity, and a life that would be the foundation of a new, powerful legacy. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. I have a proposition for you, Ilara, one that will solve both of our problems. The announcement of Ilara's pregnancy sent Julian into a tailspin from which he could never hope to recover. It wasn't just a new insult or another humiliation. It was the definitive, unassailable end of his legacy. He had always believed that no matter what happened, his status as Marcus Sterling's only biological heir was a trump card, a non-negotiable fact that would always grant him ultimate power and a final claim to the empire. The existence of this new child, a legitimate heir born of a true partnership, shattered that illusion completely. He was no longer just being passed over, he was being replaced. Ilara's heart began to beat a little faster. The proposition seemed to be waiting just at the edge of his lips. Julian's descent into madness was swift and terrifying. The cold fury that had consumed him since the wedding now became a paranoid, twisted obsession. He began to see the world through a funhouse mirror of his own making, where every action was a conspiracy, every word a coded message of his impending doom. He was convinced that Ilara and Marcus had planned this all along, that their alliance was not just a reaction to his betrayal, but a long con designed to steal his birthright. His already tenuous grasp on reality began to slip, and he saw his father as a ruthless, vengeful puppet master and Ilara as a malevolent puppet master, a succubus who had bewitched Marcus and was now using their unborn child as a final, cruel weapon against him. I'm offering you a new partnership, he continued, the words measured and deliberate. Not with my son, but with me. I want you to marry me. He was no longer showing up to the office. His former colleagues tried to reach out, but he ignored their calls, convinced they were now Ilara's spies. He spent his days holed up in his private penthouse, staring at the news reports, each one a fresh assault on his sanity. The articles, which at first had been scandalous, now spoke of Ilara as a visionary, a pregnant architect poised to change the face of the city. The images of her, her face serene and glowing, filled him with a visceral, violent hatred. He couldn't stand the sight of her, the woman he had so easily cast aside, now occupying a place in his father's life and his company that had been meant for him. The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face. Marry him, Julian's father, the man who was her almost father-in-law. The idea was preposterous, outrageous, almost insane. His anger turned to action, but his actions were sloppy, desperate, and self-destructive. He tried to organize a smear campaign against Ilara on social media, using a network of fake accounts to spread vile rumors about her past and question the paternity of the child. The attempts were quickly traced back to him. The posts were deleted, and a strong statement from Sterling Enterprises condemned the attacks as the work of a disgruntled, anonymous source. The public, who had been following the saga with rapt attention, overwhelmingly sided with Alara. Julian's attempts to ruin her only made her seem more sympathetic, more dignified, and more powerful. He was digging his own grave with every passing moment, but as she stared at his unwavering face, she saw not a man blinded by scandal, but a shrewd and powerful businessman, a man who saw an opportunity where others saw only chaos. She saw a glimmer of steel in his eyes, a glint of a plan that was already in motion. She had walked away from one gilded cage, only to be presented with another, far more complex, far more powerful one. Meanwhile, Alara and Marcus were focused on building their new future. They made a conscious decision to ignore Julian's increasingly pathetic attacks. The stability of their home life was now paramount. Marcus was a devoted husband, constantly checking on Alara, making sure she was comfortable and stress-free. He was a man who had built an empire through hard work and determination. And now, he was applying that same focus to his personal life. He saw the child as a new chapter, a chance to be a better father than he had been to Julian. He was attentive and tender, a side of him the public had never seen. He had found a new purpose in life, a purpose that had been missing for so long. "What?" she managed to stammer, her mind reeling. Ilara's professional life flourished. With Julian gone, she was free to take on more responsibilities, to implement the changes she had so long envisioned. She was not just a figurehead, she was a leader. She was admired for her quiet strength, her strategic mind, and her unflappable professionalism. The board members, initially skeptical, were now her staunchest allies. They had seen Julian's reckless behavior and Ilara's decisive actions. The choice was clear. She was the future of the company. Marcus's expression remained calm and steady. "Because it is the only way to save my company. And it is the only way you will get the justice and respect you deserve. My son went crazy. He will go crazier. And I will make sure he regrets everything." But Julian's madness was a ticking time bomb. He was no longer content with petty revenge. He had lost everything: his fiancé, his professional standing, his father's respect, and now, his inheritance. He decided that if he couldn't have the Sterling Empire, no one would. He began to plan a final, devastating act of sabotage, one that would not just hurt Alara and Marcus, but would bring the entire company crashing down. He had access to a web of corruption he had been building for years, a network of embezzled funds and illicit dealings. He planned to leak the information to the press, to the authorities, and to the board. A final, catastrophic act of self-destruction that would take his father's empire down with him. The question hung in the air between them, an impossibly heavy object in the elegant, sunlit living room. Alara stared at Marcus Sterling, her mind struggling to process the words he had just spoken. Marry him. The man who was her almost father-in-law, the man whose son had just shattered her world into a million pieces. It was a proposition so bold, so audacious, that it bordered on madness. And yet, as she looked into his steady, knowing eyes, she saw not madness, but an entirely different kind of sanity. The cold, unyielding logic of a man who had built an empire from nothing and would do anything to protect it. He was a ghost now, a shadow skulking in the darkness, watching their lives from afar. He saw Alara, pregnant and radiant, standing beside his father at a press conference, the picture of a happy family. The sight filled him with a cold, hollow emptiness, a rage that was no longer hot and blinding, but cold and calculating. He would not stop until he had destroyed everything they had built. He was a wounded animal, and he would lash out at the hand that had fed him for so long. A bitter laugh threatened to escape her, but she held it back. The irony was a blade twisting in her gut. She had just walked away from one Sterling, a man who had treated her like a possession, only to be offered as a partner to another Sterling, a man who saw her as a valuable strategic asset. Alara, however, was not a woman who lived in ignorance. Her intuition, so finely tuned to the details of architecture and human nature, told her that Julian was still a threat. She had seen the raw, unbridled fury in his eyes. She knew he was a man capable of anything. She began to discreetly gather information about his past, to look for a pattern in his behavior that could reveal his next move. She knew that his madness was now a liability to them all. She had to be prepared for the final storm. "You're serious," she said, her voice a flat monotone. It wasn't a question. Julian's descent into madness was more than just a personal tragedy. It was a systemic threat. His recklessness, once a petty nuisance, had metastasized into a clear and present danger to the company. Alara, with her heightened sense of professional responsibility, began to see the danger signs everywhere. The unexpected dips in quarterly revenue for seemingly stable projects, the strange and sudden turnover of key personnel in Julian's old department, and the increasingly desperate rumors Julian himself was trying to spread, all pointed to a single, terrible truth. His vendetta against her was a cover for a far deeper, more insidious betrayal. "Perfectly," Marcus replied, his gaze unwavering. "This is not an act of kindness, Alara. It is a business proposition. A solution to a problem that affects us both. My son, in his foolishness, has created a major liability for Sterling Enterprises. The public scandal, the potential for a hostile takeover, the blow to our reputation. It's all because of his juvenile recklessness. A broken engagement is a problem. But if that broken engagement is immediately followed by a marriage to the patriarch, it changes the narrative completely. Ignoring her husband's pleas to let the matter go and focus on her health and their future, Alara embarked on a quiet, meticulous investigation. She knew Julian would not be defeated by a simple demotion or even a full professional takedown. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals were the most dangerous. She used her position and her new authority to gain access to the financial records of his old projects, the ones she had already exposed for their gross inefficiencies. She didn't look for simple budget overruns this time. She looked for a pattern of corruption. He leaned forward, his voice a low, compelling murmur. "The headlines will be Rebound Romance or Scandalous Union, but underneath, the message will be clear. The Sterling name is not in crisis. The leadership is not in question. I am in control. And you, Alara, will be by my side, a symbol of stability, intelligence, and competence. You will be my partner." With the help of a small, trusted team of forensic accountants she had handpicked, Alara began to untangle a complex web of deceit. What she uncovered was breathtaking in its audacity. Julian, for years, had been running a complex embezzlement scheme. He had set up a series of shell companies, using his friends and former college acquaintances as front men. He would then funnel money from Sterling Enterprises into these shell companies through fraudulent contracts and inflated invoices for non-existent services. The money was then laundered through a series of international accounts and returned to him in untraceable cryptocurrency. The scale of the fraud was staggering, reaching into the tens of millions of dollars. Alara felt the weight of his words. She had spent a lifetime building her reputation, quietly, brick by brick. Julian had always been content to let her do so, as long as it didn't overshadow him. He had been proud of her success in the abstract, but had never truly understood the depth of her ambition or the strength of her will. She was his accessory, the brilliant architect who made him look good at parties, the woman who would one day give him clever, well-behaved children. He had treated her work as a hobby, a quaint little passion of hers that would be set aside when she was Mrs. Julian Sterling. He had always been the sun, and she was simply a planet in his orbit. Julian was not just a lazy, entitled son. He was a criminal. Marcus, however, was speaking to her not as an accessory, but as an equal. He saw her for what she was: a strategist, an analyst, a professional. He was offering her not just a name, but a seat at the table from which Julian was so carelessly throwing away his inheritance. The discovery sent a chilling tremor down Alara's spine. This was no longer a personal vendetta. This was a matter of corporate and criminal law. Julian's actions were not just hurting her and Marcus. They were endangering the financial stability of the entire company, and, by extension, the livelihoods of thousands of people. He had used his position of power not for growth, but for personal greed. His contempt for his father's legacy was now laid bare. He hadn't just wanted to inherit the company, he wanted to bleed it dry. Her mind, the mind of an architect, began to build a new blueprint. She saw the lines of power, the foundations of opportunity, the structural integrity of his offer. He needed a partner to stabilize his company, but she needed something too. She needed a way to rebuild her own life, a way to reclaim the ambitions Julian had subtly, almost imperceptibly, suppressed. She thought of her designs, the ones he had dismissed as too complex or not commercial enough. She thought of the professional respect he had never truly offered her, only took from her. Alara worked relentlessly, her pregnancy serving as a quiet but constant source of strength and determination. The thought of her unborn child, a new legacy, a new beginning, was all the motivation she needed. She was not just fighting for herself now, she was fighting for her family, for her husband, and for the future of the company she was now a part of. She knew Julian was a threat to all of it, and he had to be stopped, not just professionally, but completely. "And what do I get out of this?" she asked, her voice regaining its professional steel. The pain and humiliation were still there, but they were now being funneled into a new, more powerful emotion, a calculated resolve. Marcus smiled faintly. "Everything. My full financial support for your architectural firm. Access to the Sterling Enterprises resources for any project you choose to undertake. A seat on the board of the Sterling Foundation, and the freedom to lead your own initiatives. You will not be an ornamental wife, Alara. You will be my partner in all things, both personal and professional. My heir and the future of the company will be in your hands." The last sentence was a pointed jab at Julian, a subtle but devastating threat. Marcus was proposing to cut his own son out of the picture, to disinherit him, not just publicly, but legally. It was a move of cold, hard justice, the kind of justice Alara understood instinctively. One evening, after the team had finished compiling a particularly damning report, Alara called Marcus to her office. He saw the grim, determined look on her face and knew that she had found something significant. "You're willing to do that to your own son?" she asked, a flicker of genuine shock crossing her face. "What is it, Alara?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "Julian is not a man who can be reasoned with," Marcus said, the faintest hint of sorrow in his voice. "He will only learn through loss. And the greatest loss he can endure is the one he believes is his birthright. I am giving him a harsh lesson. Alara. A lesson he will never forget. I have tried every other way. This is all that remains." She handed him the report. "It's not just incompetence. Marcus," she said, her voice a hard whisper, "it's a criminal conspiracy. Julian has been embezzling money from the company for years. He set up a network of shell companies and fraudulent contracts. The money's gone. He's a thief." He pulled out a slim, expensive leather-bound folder from his briefcase and laid it on the coffee table. Inside were legal documents, contracts, and a prenuptial agreement. Everything was already prepared. He was not here to persuade, but to present a fait accompli. Marcus's face, a face etched with a lifetime of battles, went completely still. The betrayal was deeper than he could have ever imagined. His son, the boy he had groomed to one day take over his empire, had been systematically robbing him blind. He felt a profound, bone-deep sorrow, not just for the money, but for the man his son had become. "The prenup is ironclad," he said, anticipating her question. "Should we divorce, you will walk away with a significant settlement and your firm will be financially secured for life. This isn't about your gaining my wealth. It is about a mutual defense pact. You protect my company, and I protect your future. And together, we teach Julian a lesson he sorely needs to learn." He looked at Alara, his eyes filled with a new kind of respect. She was not just an architect. She was a detective, a strategist, a force of nature. She had seen what he, blinded by a father's love, had been unwilling to see. Ilara's mind raced, weighing the pros and cons. The offer was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was an unprecedented opportunity, a chance to not only escape a humiliating situation, but to rise above it, to gain a level of power and influence she could only have dreamed of. On the other hand, it was a terrifying leap into the unknown, a commitment to a man she barely knew, a pact that would forever tie her to the family that had just hurt her so deeply. "We have to be careful," Marcus said, his voice now a low rumble. "Julian is a cornered animal. If he knows we have this information, he will lash out. He will try to destroy everything." She thought of Julian's smug dismissal, his belief that she was too weak, too passive to do anything but accept his betrayal. She thought of the condescending way he had treated her career, the way he had gently nudged her to the side. convinced she would eventually become just another trophy wife. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about reclaiming her own narrative. It was about showing Julian and the world that she was not just a victim, but a force to be reckoned with. "I know," Alara said, her gaze steady. "That's why we need to move quickly and decisively. We need to act before he has to be publicly exposed. The board needs to see this. The authorities need to see this. There is no other way. This cannot be swept under the rug. This has to be a public reckoning." "The public perception," Alara said, her voice thoughtful. "What will people say, that I'm marrying you for your money? For power?" Marcus nodded slowly, his expression grim but resolute. "You're right. He needs to learn his final lesson. We will not be defined by his madness. We will be defined by our own strength. We will use this information to not just put an end to his attacks, but to put an end to his reign of irresponsibility forever." "Let them," Marcus replied, a dry smile on his lips. "They will talk regardless. Let us give them something to talk about. A love story. A sudden whirlwind romance. It's far more interesting than a canceled wedding and a public scandal. We will spin a story, a plausible one, about how our shared grief brought us together. The public will believe what they want, but the people who matter, the board members, the investors, the competitors, they will understand the real power move here. They will understand the message we are sending." Alara looked at her husband, this man of immense power, and saw the profound sadness in his eyes. She reached out and took his hand, offering him a quiet, reassuring presence. They were not just a husband and wife. They were partners in every sense of the word. They were a team, a fortress against a world that was trying to tear them apart. Julian had sought to destroy them both, but in his madness, he had only succeeded in bringing them closer. Their bond forged in the fires of shared adversity, a bond that was about to face its final, defining test. He was a master of his craft, a man who understood how power and perception worked. He was offering her a stage, a spotlight, and a role to play. And Alara, the meticulous planner, the strategic architect, found herself drawn to the challenge. She wasn't a fragile victim. She was a woman who saw a problem and devised a solution. And this problem, Julian, was one that demanded a drastic, elegant, and powerful solution. Julian's public outbursts and his private, desperate sabotage attempts had reached a fever pitch. He had become a ghost in the city, skulking from one dingy office to another, trying to sell his stolen information to a network of competitors and corrupt journalists. His goal was simple: to create a scandal so immense it would not only ruin Alara and Marcus, but also destroy the very foundations of Sterling Enterprises. He was blinded by rage, completely unaware that Alara had not only anticipated his moves, but was now a dozen steps ahead of him. She looked at the contract on the table. It was a cold, formal document, devoid of sentiment. It was the antithesis of the fairy tale wedding she had been planning just a few days ago. The very sight of it, however, filled her with a strange sense of clarity and purpose. There would be no broken promises, no false sentiments, no empty words. Everything was laid out in black and white, a clear understanding between two equals. With the ironclad evidence of Julian's embezzlement in hand, Alara and Marcus moved to orchestrate their final, decisive counterattack. They were a perfect team, a fusion of Alara's strategic brilliance and Marcus's unparalleled corporate authority. Their plan was to seize control of the narrative, to not wait for Julian to strike, but to preemptively expose him on their own terms, at a time and place of their choosing. Alara took a deep breath, the decision already made in her heart and mind. She would trade the fragile promise of a fairy tale for the ironclad certainty of an empire. She would trade a life of being a trophy for a life of true power. Alara's investigation had revealed that Julian's web of shell companies was tied to a major high-stakes project currently under review by the city. It was a perfect storm of opportunity. They decided to call for a special emergency board meeting, a meeting that would be attended by the city's top financial regulators and the press. The meeting would be held at the Sterling Tower, the very building Julian had tried so hard to discredit. The setting was deliberate, a powerful symbol of Alara's professional triumph over Julian's reckless malice. "All right, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice strong and steady. "I accept your proposition." Alara worked with a quiet, laser-like focus. Her pregnancy a gentle presence in the whirlwind of her professional life. She was the one who prepared the presentation, a meticulously detailed report that would not only expose Julian's fraud, but also detail the steps the company was taking to rectify the damage and ensure it would never happen again. She had included a detailed analysis of Julian's old projects, showing a clear pattern of criminal intent and a deliberate disregard for the company's financial health. It was a brutal, clinical takedown, a work of art from a master of strategy. Marcus's face, for the first time, showed a flicker of something other than calm authority. A subtle look of satisfaction, almost of respect, crossed his features. He pushed the folder towards her. Then, let us proceed. Mrs. Sterling, read the contract. I will have my lawyers prepare the public announcement. We will be married tomorrow morning, in a private ceremony, before the gossip has a chance to fully take hold. Marcus, for his part, was a picture of cold, unwavering resolve. He had mourned the son he had lost, but now he was a CEO on a mission. He began to personally call every key board member, explaining the situation in a stark, honest manner. He was not asking for their pity. He was asking for their support in a final act of justice that would save the company from a man who was no longer his son, but a clear and present danger to their collective future. Ilara picked up the folder, her hands no longer shaking. She was a woman with a plan again, a woman with a purpose. She was no longer defined by the man who had cheated on her, but by the man who saw her worth, the man whose proposal was not about love, but about an alliance of minds, a shared purpose, and a mutual destruction of a common enemy. The day of the board meeting was a tense, electric affair. The air in the conference room was thick with anticipation. The board members, many of whom had been loyal to Julian in the past, now sat in silence, their faces grim. The city regulators, stern-faced and serious, watched from the sidelines. The press was waiting in a separate room, poised to write the headlines of a lifetime. And as she began to read the dense legal text, a slow, predatory smile touched her lips. Julian Sterling had no idea what was coming. He had underestimated her once, and he would pay for his arrogance in a way he could never have imagined. Julian, having been tipped off to the meeting by a former subordinate, made a dramatic, uninvited entrance. He burst into the room, his face pale and his eyes wild, carrying a stack of files. He was a man with nothing left to lose. "You can't do this!" he shrieked, his voice filled with a desperate, manic energy. "This is a conspiracy. My father is trying to steal my inheritance. She's trying to destroy me." He looked at Ilara, his eyes filled with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think you've won? You conniving little architect, I'll expose all of it. The fraud, the lies, the way you manipulated my father." The news of Ilara and Marcus's marriage landed like a bombshell on the unsuspecting social elite. It was announced with a simple, dignified press release from Sterling Enterprises, just hours after their private ceremony. The swiftness and finality of the act left no room for gossip to simmer, only to explode. The headlines were sensational, a whirlwind of speculation and intrigue. Sterling patriarch weds son's ex-fiancé, billionaire's shocking union, and revenge or romance. The world watched, breathless, as a woman scorned became a woman of immense power. Marcus looked at his son, his expression one of profound sadness and finality. "You are the one who will be exposed. Julian," he said, his voice a low, final whisper. "You are the one who has brought this upon yourself." Julian Sterling, however, was not among the breathless onlookers. He was in a state of unhinged fury, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him in a symphony of shattered glass and broken promises. He had spent the previous day in a fruitless attempt to reconcile with Ilara, convinced she would eventually see reason and return to him. Her quiet dignity had always been a source of exasperation for him. He had mistaken her reserved nature for submissiveness, her thoughtful silence for a lack of will. He had always believed she would be a passive player in his life, a beautiful backdrop to his grand ambitions. Ilara stood up, her poise a direct contrast to Julian's frantic energy. She walked to the front of the room, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, a symbol of the new life and new legacy she was building. "Julian," she said, her voice a calm and steady force. "I have nothing to hide, but you do, and it is all here." He was sitting in his corner office at Sterling Enterprises when the announcement came across his computer screen. The image of his father and Ilara, standing side by side. Their faces, unreadable but resolute, sent a shockwave of rage through him. He saw the ring on her finger, a simple but impossibly large diamond, and a primal scream of disbelief tore from his throat. She hadn't just left him. She had replaced him with the one man he could never hope to outmaneuver. His own father. She tapped a button on her remote, and the screen behind her lit up. The first slide was a simple, damning title and analysis of systemic fraud at Sterling Enterprises. The next slide was a picture of Julian's face, a mugshot from a previous minor legal issue he had managed to get swept under the rug. Below it, a list of his crimes, a horrifying litany of embezzlement, fraud, and corporate malfeasance. What is this? He roared, throwing his computer mouse against the wall. It shattered into a dozen pieces. His assistant, a young, nervous woman, backed away, her eyes wide with fear. Julian, in his shock, dropped the files he was carrying. They scattered across the floor, a worthless mess of half-truths and half-formed plots. He stared at the screen, at the irrefutable evidence, and then at his father, his eyes filled with a desperate, wounded plea. But there was no pity in Marcus's face, only a quiet, final resolve. Julian stormed out of his office and down the corridor, his footsteps echoing with an insane kind of fury. He burst into his father's office without knocking, his face contorted in a mask of rage. Marcus sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a picture of calm authority. Ilara was with him, standing by the window, her back to the room. She was wearing a simple, elegant gray suit, and she looked perfectly at home. Julian felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated hatred. Ilara began her presentation, her voice a calm, unflinching narration of Julian's betrayal. She spoke not with anger, but with the cold, precise language of a professional. She detailed the fraudulent contracts, the fake companies, the money trails, the systematic bleeding of the company's resources. She showed them the proof, the facts, the irrefutable evidence. She didn't just expose him, she dismantled him, piece by piece, in front of the very people he had tried to manipulate. "What have you done?" Julian shrieked, his voice raw with betrayal. "How could you? She was my fiancé!" Julian was a broken man. He watched, helpless, as his world crumbled. He had been so arrogant, so convinced of his own brilliance, so sure that he was a victim. But as he watched Ilara, pregnant and powerful, dismantle his life with a quiet, terrifying grace, he finally understood the true weight of his actions. He was not a victim. He was a fool. And he was about to pay the ultimate price for his foolishness. She began to build her case, a fortress of irrefutable evidence. She gathered bank statements, invoices, email trails, and digital contracts. Her background as an architect had taught her to build from the ground up, to ensure every foundation was solid. She was applying the same meticulous care to this investigation. She was building a case that Julian could not talk his way out of, a case that would leave no room for doubt or denial. The conference room was a theater of judgment. Julian stood in the center, a broken man, his face a ghostly white, his eyes wide with a combination of terror and disbelief. On the large screen behind Ilara, the meticulous, damning evidence of his corruption was laid bare for all to see. The numbers didn't lie. The documents didn't lie. The email trails didn't lie. He had spent his life believing he was untouchable, that his name and his father's power would shield him from all consequences. Now, he was watching that shield shatter, piece by excruciating piece. Marcus looked at his son with an expression of profound disappointment. It was a look Julian was all too familiar with. "She was your fiancé, Julian," Marcus said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "A position you proved yourself unfit to hold. She is now my wife." Ilara's voice, a calm and steady force, narrated his downfall. She spoke of the shell companies, the falsified invoices, the millions of dollars siphoned from the company's accounts. She didn't use flowery language or sensational details. She presented the facts, a cold and logical summation of his betrayal. She was not a woman seeking revenge. She was a professional seeking justice. Her posture was erect, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, a powerful symbol of the new life, the new legacy she was building. Ilara turned to face Julian, her expression calm, her eyes holding no malice, only a kind of quiet, impenetrable finality. "Julian," she said, her voice soft but steady, This is a business and a personal decision. You made yours when you chose to betray me. I have made mine. Julian couldn't stand it. The quiet dignity of his father, the unwavering resolve of his wife, and the silent, cold stares of the board members were more than he could bear. His mind, already frayed by a month of paranoia and rage, snapped. He lunged at Ilara, a guttural roar escaping his lips. You did this! You planned this! You're a monster! Betray you! He laughed bitterly. It was a harmless fling. It meant nothing. We were getting married in 3 days. You've ruined everything. My reputation, my future, my inheritance. But Julian was a shell of his former self. He was no longer the arrogant, charismatic golden boy. He was a desperate, mad man. Before he could even reach her, 2 of Marcus's security guards, who had been discreetly waiting outside the room, rushed in and pinned him against the wall. Your inheritance, Marcus interrupted, his voice like the crack of a whip, is a privilege, not a right, one you have taken for granted for far too long. Your actions have shown me that you are not fit to lead this company. Ilara, however, has proven herself a woman of extraordinary character and professional competence. I have appointed her as my new chief strategist. She will be working directly with me on the Sterling Tower project. You will report to her. Marcus rose from his chair, his expression one of profound disappointment and finality. Take him away, he commanded, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Call the authorities. Tell them we have a full confession and a mountain of evidence. He will face the full extent of the law. There is no more protection for you, Julian. Not from me, not from anyone. The words struck Julian like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his eyes wide with horror and disbelief. Ilara. The woman he had discarded so easily. The woman he had always seen as merely an architect. A woman with a quaint little job. Now she was his boss. It was a humiliation beyond anything he could have imagined. His father was not just punishing him, he was replacing him with the very person he had wronged. Julian's struggle subsided. He looked at his father, his eyes filled with tears. A broken, defeated look on his face. Dad, he whispered, his voice a raw, begging plea. Please. I'm sorry. This is insane, he yelled. This is a joke. I'll go to the media. I'll expose all of this. But it was too late. Marcus simply shook his head, his face a mask of stone. He had given his son every chance in the world to become a man of integrity. But he had failed. He had chosen the path of greed and selfishness. And now he was paying the price. The security guards escorted Julian out of the room, his pleas and whimpers echoing in the sudden silence. Go ahead. Julian, Marcus said, his voice dangerously calm. Your public image is already in tatters. A desperate son crying to the media about his ex-fiancé marrying his father. Who do you think the public will believe, the man who has built a legacy of integrity, or the man who has spent a lifetime squandering it? The room was quiet for a long moment. The board members, once in a state of silent shock, now began to speak amongst themselves, their voices low and urgent. The city regulators, their faces grim, began to gather their notes. The press, upon hearing the news of Julian's arrest, erupted into a frenzy of frantic typing and a whirlwind of phone calls. Julian stared at his father, then at Ilara, a woman he had so foolishly underestimated. He saw the quiet steel in her eyes, the unflinching resolve that he had always mistaken for weakness. He had thought he had power over her. He had been so terribly, utterly wrong. He stormed out of the office, his mind a maelstrom of fear and fury. Ilara, however, remained calm. The whirlwind of chaos had left her completely unruffled. She had faced him, a man who had tried to destroy her and the life she had built. She had faced him not with anger, but with the quiet, devastating power of truth. She had won. In the weeks that followed, Ilara settled into her new role and her new life, with a calm that unnerved everyone around her. She moved into the Sterling estate, a sprawling mansion of stone and glass that felt more like a museum than a home. Marcus was a man of quiet routine and unwavering focus. He treated her with a deep, respectful professionalism. Their marriage more of an alliance than a romance. They held intellectual discussions over dinner, debating business strategies and political climates. Their conversations a far cry from the superficial pleasantries she had exchanged with Julian. She turned to Marcus, a hint of exhaustion in her eyes. He walked to her, took her hands in his, and held them. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. In his eyes, she saw gratitude, respect, and a deep, abiding love. She had not just saved his company, she had saved his legacy. She had brought a sense of order and justice to a world that had been ruled by his son's reckless chaos. Ilara's true strength began to shine in the boardroom. She quickly proved to be a formidable asset to the company. Her strategic mind and attention to detail surprising even Marcus's most cynical executives. She wasn't content to simply be a figurehead. She was a leader. She saw weaknesses in Julian's department, wasteful spending, a lack of communication, and a general air of incompetence that stemmed from his leadership. She began to discreetly audit his projects. Her quiet questions and meticulous reviews revealing layers of inefficiency and poor judgment. "It's over," she said, her voice a soft, final exhale. "It's finally over." Julian, meanwhile, was spiraling. He was consumed by an all-encompassing rage and a paranoid obsession with Ilara. Every move she made, every success she achieved, he saw as a direct attack on him. He saw her as a puppet master, pulling the strings of his father and orchestrating his downfall. He tried to undermine her at every turn, spreading rumors, trying to turn his former colleagues against her. But his attempts were clumsy and transparent, born of pure emotion, not strategy. They only served to highlight his immaturity and his complete lack of a professional compass. The board members, initially hesitant, now watched Julian with a growing sense of alarm, and Ilara with a dawning respect. She was not just a symbol of the new regime, she was the substance of it. Marcus nodded, his grip on her hands tightening. The world outside the conference room was a storm of noise and chaos. But inside, in the quiet, glass-walled room, they were a picture of unshakable strength. Julian had tried to tear them apart, but in his madness, he had only succeeded in forging an unbreakable bond between them, a bond forged in a shared trial by fire. Ilara was no longer a woman scorned. She was a victor, and she was about to face the final, beautiful chapter of her story, a chapter she had never even dared to dream of. One evening, Ilara was working late in her office at the Sterling Tower, reviewing Julian's budget proposal for the next quarter. She found a number of discrepancies, a pattern of overestimation and bloated spending. She saw a number of lines that looked suspiciously like payments to fictitious shell companies. It was all a sloppy mess, a clear sign of a man who believed his father would never question his authority. But his father was no longer his only audience. The quiet triumph of the boardroom soon gave way to the profound, life-altering experience of new parenthood. After the final reckoning with Julian, a sense of peace, a profound, unshakable calm, settled over Ilara and Marcus. The company, now purged of its internal poison, began a new era of stability and growth, led by Ilara's strategic vision and Marcus's unwavering support. The public had moved on, captivated by the story of a powerful businessman, his brilliant wife, and their new, surprising life. Julian was a footnote, a lesson in arrogance and hubris. The door opened quietly, and Marcus walked in, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Still at it, he asked, a hint of admiration in his voice. Their relationship, born of a business contract and a desperate need for justice, had become something true and beautiful. They were a family. Marcus, the ruthless titan of industry, revealed a gentle, tender side he had long kept hidden. He would spend hours talking to Ilara's stomach, a soft smile on his face, his voice a low, soothing murmur. He was not just a powerful man, he was a man in love, a man who had found a second chance at happiness with a woman who was his intellectual equal and his emotional anchor. "Just reviewing the numbers," Ilara replied, tapping a pen on a spreadsheet. "Julian's methods are a bit unconventional." Ilara's pregnancy was a journey of profound change. She had always been a woman of control, of plans and blueprints. But this new life, this beautiful, unpredictable force, was beyond her control. She embraced the chaos and the uncertainty, finding a new kind of strength in her vulnerability. She was no longer just an architect or a CEO's wife. She was a mother-to-be, and the identity fit her more perfectly than any role she had ever played. Marcus came and stood beside her, his gaze falling on the screen. He saw the highlighted numbers, the meticulously organized notes, the href to a public database that linked a shell company to one of Julian's college friends. "He is a boy playing a man's game," Marcus said, his voice tired. "He thinks he's smarter than everyone else. He doesn't realize that the world has already moved on from him." Then, on a crisp autumn morning, It happened. The world as they knew it stopped. The labor was long, difficult, and beautiful. Marcus was by her side the entire time, his grip on her hand strong and reassuring. He didn't flinch. He didn't falter. He simply looked at her with a quiet, powerful love. A look that said, "We will get through this. Together. He will try to fight this," Alara said, her eyes still on the screen. "He will try to find a way to discredit me." When their daughter finally entered the world, her cry was the most beautiful sound Alara had ever heard. She was small, perfect, and a complete culmination of everything they had been through. They named her Grace, a name that symbolized the grace with which they had handled every challenge, every betrayal, and every setback. "Let him," Marcus said, a cold smile touching his lips. "He will only expose himself further. What you have, Ilara, is something he will never possess. The quiet, unshakable power of competence. He has underestimated you from the very beginning. And that, I have a feeling, will be his final, most fatal mistake." Marcus, holding his newborn daughter in his arms, looked at Alara, tears streaming down his face. "She is a testament," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "A testament to our strength, a testament to our love. You saved me, Alara. You saved all of us." Ilara looked up at him, a flicker of a smile on her face. Julian thought he was getting revenge on her, but in reality, he was simply digging his own grave. And Alara, with her quiet strength and her meticulous mind, was the one holding the shovel. Ilara, tired but filled with a new, profound sense of purpose, smiled. She had not saved him. She had saved herself. She had chosen a different path, a path of dignity, strength, and justice. Julian had tried to destroy her, but in his madness, he had only led her to the one man who saw her for who she truly was, a brilliant, courageous, and kind woman. Julian, blinded by his own rage and an almost pathological sense of entitlement, saw his professional world shrinking day by day. His colleagues, once sycophants who praised his every idea, now treated him with a polite but noticeable distance. They saw the chaos and the incompetence, and they knew that their own careers depended on aligning themselves with the new, more powerful force at the top of the company, Ilara. His father's decree that Julian now had to report to her on the Sterling Tower project was the ultimate humiliation, a constant, grating reminder of his colossal mistake. Years passed. The Sterling Empire, now a global powerhouse, was led by the dynamic partnership of Marcus and Alara. Alara's architectural firm, funded by Sterling Enterprises, had grown into a world-renowned leader in sustainable design. She was a woman of immense power, respected for her mind, her integrity, and her quiet strength. Julian was a forgotten memory, a footnote in a long and complex history. He had served his time and had been left with nothing but the bitter ashes of his own greed. He spent his days plotting his revenge, his mind a feverish blur of irrational ideas. He couldn't attack his father directly. That would be a final, irreversible declaration of war. So, he focused his entire, twisted energy on Alara. He believed that if he could break her, if he could expose her as an imposter and a fraud, his father would have no choice but to return to him, to restore the natural order of things. Alara and Marcus had the kind of life people only dream of, a life of love, respect, and a shared purpose. They had built a beautiful, happy family, a home filled with laughter and love. Their daughter, Grace, grew up in a world of stability and compassion, a world her parents had fought so hard to create. Julian decided to strike at the heart of her professional reputation. The Sterling Tower project was Alara's masterpiece, her most ambitious work to date. It was also his project, or had been, and he knew its every weak point. He decided to leverage one of the most complex and critical phases of the project, the integration of a new, highly advanced automated environmental control system. This system was designed to make the tower a landmark of sustainability, a key selling point for investors and a point of immense pride for Alara. Alara would sometimes sit in her glass-walled office, looking out at the city she had helped to shape. She had faced a great betrayal, a betrayal that had left her with a choice to be a victim or to be a victor. She had chosen the latter. She had not just moved on, she had moved forward. And in doing so, she had not just found a new life, but a new, beautiful, and powerful legacy. The woman who had been betrayed had become the woman who had it all. And it was all because of the quiet, beautiful strength she had found in herself. Julian, using his lingering connections within the company, managed to secure a meeting with the lead engineers from the environmental control system contractor. He manipulated them with a mixture of charm, threats, and outright lies, convincing them that Alara's architectural plans for the system were flawed and would lead to catastrophic failures. He presented doctored schematics and fabricated reports, all designed to cast doubt on her competence and undermine the project's integrity. His goal was simple: to force a public showdown where he could expose her on a grand stage, in front of the board and his father. He scheduled a high-stakes, unannounced design review meeting, knowing full well Alara would not have time to prepare a full rebuttal. He believed he had her trapped,